They were once everywhere, on picnic tables, in Grandma's fridge, and cooling on windowsills. But now they're ghosts of recipes we barely remember. Which forgotten desserts are worth saving? And which ones are too sweet to stay lost?
Root beer barrel hard candies.
These little brown barrel-shaped candies were the unsung heroes of Grandma's candy dish. Root beer barrels weren't flashy. They didn't fizz, chew, or sparkle. But they had a strong, sweet, old-timey flavor that stuck with you. One candy could last 10 to 15 minutes, making it a perfect quiet treat during road trips, church, or library visits. They tasted like the foam on an A&W float, spicy, sweet, and deeply nostalgic. The outer layer melted slowly, revealing richer layers of flavor underneath. Often sold in bulk bins at the local drugstore or in small twist wrappers, they were cheap but reliable. Kids either loved or hated them. There was no in-between. But for fans, they were a flavorful trip back in time. Today, with sour gummies and fizzy chews dominating, the root beer barrel feels like a lost art. But if you ever found one tucked in a coat pocket or desk drawer, instant memory lane, one suck and you were back in the 80s. Peanut butter Rice Krispies squares, Rice Krispies treats were great, but in the 80s, there was a peanut butter version that ruled lunchboxes and bake sales. Made with melted peanut butter and corn syrup instead of marshmallows, these squares were richer, denser, and a little salty, the ultimate balance to sweet cereal. Sometimes topped with chocolate, sometimes left plain, they had a smooth chew and an unforgettable aroma. Moms swore they were healthier than the marshmallow version. Spoiler, they weren't. And that little lie made us love them even more. Wrapped in wax paper or cut unevenly from a casserole pan, they felt homemade even when they came from a school cafeteria. The peanut butter gave them staying power. One square kept you going through afternoon cartoons or homework battles. Over time, they gave way to packaged cereal bars. But these? They were crafted by hand, sweetened with love, and built to stick to your fingers and your memories.
What was your ultimate bake sale treat in the 80s? Magic bars, peanut butter squares, or something your school always made better than anyone else? Share your favorite sweet square in the comments. No Ready Whip on everything. Ready Whip wasn't just a topping in the 80s, it was a dessert on its own. The canned whipped cream became an icon of indulgence, sprayed directly onto pie, Jell-O, fruit salad, or straight into a kid's mouth when no one was looking. The sound of the can was instantly recognizable, and every kitchen fridge seemed to have one on standby. In an era before whipped topping alternatives flooded the market, Ready Whip was king. Some parents used it to encourage kids to eat fruit, just a little on your strawberries, while others squirted it into hot cocoa or pudding cups. Its light, airy texture and sweet vanilla cream flavor made it irresistible. Today, it's still around, but in the 80s, it felt essential, as iconic as the food it adorned. And let's be honest, every kid tested the boundaries of how much they could get into their mouth at once. Ready Whip was dessert theater in a can. Zebra cakes, the original recipe. Long before they became mass-produced lunchbox fillers, zebra cakes had a different magic. In the 80s, these little layered treats featured super soft yellow cake with a generous stripe of cream filling inside and an ultra-sweet white icing shell topped with perfect chocolate swirls. They came in twin packs wrapped in waxy plastic, and kids knew if you got both cakes, it was your lucky day. They weren't fancy, they weren't gourmet, but they were perfectly engineered sugar bombs, and biting into one felt like an occasion. The cake was moist, the frosting had that slight crackle, and the balance of cream to cake was just right. Today's versions are still around but are often firmer and less rich than their retro predecessors. Back then, zebra cakes were peak snack cake energy, the kind of treat that felt almost too good to be part of lunch. But they were, and they made everything around them just a little bit sweeter. Did you have a favorite snack cake growing up? Zebra cakes, Swiss rolls, or something totally different? Drop your dessert of choice below and tell us what made it the king of your lunchbox.
Ice cream sandwiches with soft chocolate wafers.
Long before artisanal versions took over, classic 1980s ice cream sandwiches were a freezer staple. 2 soft chocolate wafers hugging a slab of vanilla ice cream.
The wafers weren't crunchy, they were soft, cakey, and stuck to your fingers. The ice cream was basic, but that combo? Unbeatable. Biting into one left perfect tooth marks. The wrapper crinkled, the edges melted quickly, and the last few bites always slid sideways. Brands like Bluebell, Nestle, and local dairies all had versions, and kids devoured them by the box. These weren't premium treats. They were everyday heroes waiting in the freezer after a long school day. You could unwrap one in seconds, and it was always the right size for just enough indulgence. Today's versions can be overly gourmet, but back then, it was simple. Cold, sweet, soft, and perfect. No drizzle, no caramel swirl. Just you, a quiet kitchen, and a race to eat it before the edges turned to puddles. Marathon bar. It was long, it was chewy. It was the most epic candy bar of the 80s, the Marathon bar. Twisted strands of caramel coated in milk chocolate and stretched to a whopping 8 inches long. It came in a bright red wrapper with a ruler printed on the back to prove its size. You didn't bite a marathon, you tore into it, stretching the caramel like a taffy rope. It took forever to finish, which made it the perfect reward after school or post-baseball practice sugar bomb. Some kids froze them for an extra chew challenge. Others uncoiled the chocolate like it was candy spaghetti. Sadly, the bar disappeared by the late 80s, leaving behind nothing but sugar-fueled nostalgia. It was too weird, too long, too sticky, but too unforgettable. The Marathon bar wasn't just a dessert. It was a commitment, a test of patience, a full-on snack saga, and we still miss every inch of it. Did you ever take on the Marathon bar challenge, or have another chewy candy obsession that took forever to finish? Share your sweet endurance stories in the comments below.
The ice cream sandwich wafers with printed comics. In a time before smartphones, ice cream sandwiches came with entertainment built in. Specifically, the kind with comics or puzzles printed on the chocolate wafer. These vanilla-filled sandwiches were everywhere, wrapped in wax paper, stacked in gas station freezers, and passed out at pool parties. The printed jokes or riddles were always corny, but that didn't matter. You'd squint at the slightly smudged ink while the ice cream melted down your hand, trying to read before the words disappeared in your mouth. The wafer had a soft, almost cake-like texture that stuck to your fingertips, and the vanilla was smooth, sweet, and satisfying. The whole thing was a race against time and sun. Sadly, these quirky details faded as mass packaging and clean branding took over. But that comic-covered ice cream sandwich, it gave you flavor and fun in one bite. Because sometimes dessert should make you laugh before it melts. Squeeze pop bottles, edible tube of gel candy. If you were a kid in the 80s, few things felt more rebellious than squeezing neon gel candy straight into your mouth. Squeeze pops were thick, tangy, and came in plastic bottles shaped like oversized lip balm tubes. You'd twist the bottom, and the goo would rise slowly like lava, ready to lick, scoop, or dare a friend to chug. Flavors like green apple, blue raspberry, and strawberry blast were intensely sour-sweet. It wasn't about nutrition or subtlety, it was about candy as performance. You didn't just eat it, you showed it off. The tubes often got messy, sticky, and leaked into backpacks. But that didn't matter. Squeeze pops were wild. They were your dentist's nightmare, and they were every kid's dream. Over time, they vanished from stores, likely victims of mess concerns and changing tastes. But their legacy lives on in sticky fingers and the unshakable memory of holding an entire tube of sugar gel and thinking, "This is peak happiness." Did you have a favorite eat-it-your-way dessert, like squeeze pops, pixie sticks, or candy sprays? Share your wildest sugar delivery device from childhood. We know you had one. DIY sundae kits from the ice cream truck. In the 80s, ice cream trucks didn't just hand you a cone, they sometimes handed you a whole sundae experience in a cup. These DIY sundae kits came with a scoop of vanilla or chocolate soft serve tucked into a plastic container, sealed with a lid, holding a separate compartment filled with toppings. Rainbow sprinkles, crushed nuts, chocolate syrup, and even a cherry. A tiny plastic spoon came tucked under the dome. The thrill wasn't just the taste, it was the process.
Kids assembled their own perfect sundae right on the curb or front porch. The chocolate syrup always required some coaxing from its tiny packet, and the sprinkles inevitably spilled everywhere. But it was a glorious mess. Over time, these kits disappeared in favor of pre-assembled treats. But the sundae kit was something special. It turned dessert into an event and made every kid feel like their own personal ice cream artist, even if most of the toppings ended up on their shirt. Jell-O gelatin straws. Yes, really. One of the weirdest, most short-lived Jell-O experiments of the 80s was the gelatin straw. Packaged in bright tubes like juice boxes, these straws were filled with thick, slurpable Jell-O you could squeeze or sip. Meant to bridge the gap between drink and dessert, they were marketed as fun, fruity snacks for kids on the go. The consistency was somewhere between jelly and goo, and the flavors were classic: cherry, grape, lime. You could eat them straight from the straw or squeeze them into a cup like alien toothpaste. They were kind of gross, kind of amazing, and totally addictive. They didn't last long, possibly because they confused everyone. But if you were lucky enough to try one, you remember it well. Jell-O gelatin straws were one of the weirdest, most wonderful dessert experiments to ever hit the lunchbox scene. What's the weirdest dessert delivery system you remember? Tubes, cans, sticks, or straws? Drop your favorite "wait, this was edible?" treat from the 80s in the comments.
Sprinkle-covered chocolate. Fudge cake slices.
Grocery store bakeries in the 80s often featured simple but irresistible fudge cake slices, pre-cut and sold in clear plastic boxes. The standout? The ones topped with rainbow sprinkles. These cakes were thick and moist with a deep, rich chocolate flavor, covered in dense, slightly glossy frosting, and generously doused in crunchy, colorful sprinkles. Sometimes sold individually, sometimes in packs of 4, they sat proudly beside donuts and jelly rolls in the bakery case. They weren't birthday cake. They weren't cupcakes. They were something in between, a no-occasion-needed indulgence you might grab after school or get as a surprise from mom. The combination of soft cake, fudgy icing, and candy crunch created a nostalgic texture unmatched by today's more elevated desserts. Over time, they faded from shelves as bakery items became fancier and more minimalist. But ask any 80s kid. Nothing felt quite as fun or as rewarding as digging into a sprinkle-covered fudge brick of love. Strawberry pretzel Jell-O salad. It was called a salad, but it was pure dessert. Strawberry pretzel Jell-O salad. This iconic 80s potluck masterpiece had 3 layers: a salty pretzel crust, a creamy whipped center, usually cream cheese and Cool Whip, and a shimmering red crown of strawberry gelatin with sliced fruit suspended inside. You'd scoop it out with a spatula, revealing the colorful cross-section like edible geology. The genius, that salty-sweet combination, the crunch of the pretzels, the tang of the cream cheese, the bounce of the Jell-O. It showed up at family reunions, church potlucks, and school picnics, always met with an eye roll from kids who didn't want salad, followed by a blissful silence after the first bite. Today, it's made less often. Maybe because it takes time, or maybe because we forgot how perfect it was. But those who remember know that strawberry pretzel Jell-O salad is a dessert worth reviving, even if you still call it a side dish. Popcorn balls wrapped in cellophane. Once a holiday treat and birthday party standby, popcorn balls wrapped in shiny cellophane were a sweet and salty treasure of the 80s. Made by hand or sold at school fundraisers, these sticky spheres were held together by corn syrup or melted marshmallow, then wrapped tight in colorful, clear wrappers. Sometimes tinted pink, green, or orange, they looked like oversized candies and had the crunch to match. The best ones had hints of vanilla or cinnamon and a perfect soft chew at the center. They weren't eaten in bites. You picked pieces off, strand by caramel strand. While they've vanished from most shelves today, they once filled treat tables, Halloween bags, and roadside bake sales. Parents made them at home, molding warm popcorn into glowing globes of crunchy magic. Over time, fears about stickiness, shelf life, and simplicity pushed them aside. But ask any 80s kid. Unwrapping a popcorn ball was like opening edible fireworks, unexpected, nostalgic, and pure joy. Dessert pizza, sugar cookie crust edition. Not all pizza was savory in the 80s. Enter the dessert pizza, made with a sugar cookie crust, sweet cream cheese sauce, and a rainbow of sliced fruit or candy toppings. These were DIY favorites at sleepovers and classroom parties. Some versions had chocolate drizzle, marshmallow fluff, or even crumbled cereal, whatever you had in the pantry. The original was usually baked in a pizza pan, cooled, frosted, and decorated like edible art. It wasn't uncommon to see faces, flowers, or messages spelled out in kiwi slices and strawberry rings. It was messy, colorful, and interactive, just the kind of dessert kids loved. Dessert pizza taught you that creativity belonged in the kitchen, and that not every pizza needed mozzarella. By the 2000s, it had mostly become a Pinterest project, but in the 80s it was pure fun, served in slices. It was more than dessert. It was an edible canvas, and we'd love to cut ourselves a piece again.
Soft serve ice cream in edible waffle bowls.
Forget plastic cups and cones. Edible waffle bowls were the height of dessert elegance in the 1980s. Found in ice cream parlors and some adventurous cafeterias, these bowls were crunchy, lightly sweet, and shaped perfectly to hold a generous swirl of soft serve. Vanilla chocolate twist was the most common combo, but it was the toppings bar that made the moment magic. Crushed peanuts, gummy bears, hot fudge, rainbow sprinkles. The bowl softened just slightly under the cold ice cream, becoming chewy and flavorful by the last bite. You didn't need a plate, a spoon, or even a tray, just hands and happiness. Waffle bowls eventually gave way to paper cups and plastic lids, and today you'll mostly find them at frozen yogurt chains. But in the 80s, they were a dessert event. That perfect crunchy edge and melty base meant every bite was a race against time, and it was totally worth every drip. Magic shell chocolate topping. In the 80s, no ice cream night was complete without the chocolate miracle in a bottle, Magic Shell. You'd squeeze it over your favorite scoop, usually vanilla, and watch it harden instantly into a crispy, glossy shell. It felt like edible science. Kids would knock on the hardened top with spoons or fingers, breaking it apart like sugary treasure. The original flavor was classic chocolate, but soon came caramel, butterscotch, and even chocolate fudge swirl. The texture contrast, cold creamy ice cream with crackling chocolate, was an instant win. Bottled in squeezable brown containers, Magic Shell was easy to miss on the grocery shelf, but unforgettable on your sundae. Eventually, low-fat trends and elaborate toppings pushed it to the side. But for a moment in dessert history, nothing felt cooler than turning your scoop into a chocolate-covered masterpiece. No heating, no stirring, just pour and watch dessert transform. It was more than topping. It was a show in every squeeze.
Frosted fudge Pop-Tarts. Heavily iced edition.
Pop-Tarts are still around today, but the frosted fudge versions of the 80s were something else entirely. The chocolate filling was gooier, the crust was softer, and the frosting was thick. We're talking edge-to-edge icing, not today's stingy drizzle. When toasted, the center turned warm and molten, like a brownie in a pastry shell. But even cold from the foil pouch, it tasted like a midday dessert disguised as breakfast. Some kids secretly packed them in lunchboxes or stashed them for after-school snack time. You could eat them whole, or break off the corners to savor the gooey middle last. Over the years, the formula changed. Thinner icing, firmer crusts, and less fudgy goodness. But for 80s kids, frosted fudge Pop-Tarts weren't a quick meal. They were a chocolate event. Toast one today, and you might still catch a flicker of that golden childhood moment when a toaster pastry could double as full-on dessert. During the 1980s, a handful of brands tried something brilliant, turning classic pies into single-serve snacks in cups. These weren't yogurt cups. They were mini, spoonable pies, layered with graham cracker crust, creamy filling, and fluffy whipped topping. Flavors like chocolate cream, banana cream, and coconut were the most popular. Some came in refrigerated multi-packs, others were sold in individual dome lid containers at lunch counters and cafeterias. The taste? Like a diner dessert shrunk down for your lunchbox. The texture was rich, layered, and totally satisfying. Kids loved mixing it up before diving in, and it always felt a little fancier than pudding or Jell-O. Eventually, these pie cups were edged out by more portable, preservative-friendly snacks. But if you ever peeled back that plastic lid and dug into a cup of chocolate cream pie at the school lunch table, you remember the luxury. It was elegance on a plastic spoon, and it deserves a delicious revival. If you grew up in the 80s, nothing made you feel cooler than eating an ice cream push-up, especially if it was Flintstones branded. These orange sherbet treats came in cardboard tubes that you pushed from the bottom, making it feel like you were launching a rocket of flavor. The sherbet was tangy, creamy, and somehow both refreshing and indulgent, perfect for summer days and cartoon-filled afternoons. The packaging featured Fred, Barney, and the gang, turning every snack into a mini prehistoric adventure. The best part? That last bite that always stuck at the bottom of the tube, requiring a determined push or a sneaky finger scoop. Today's freezer cases are packed with ice cream novelties, but few match the sheer joyful simplicity of a Flintstones push-up. It wasn't just dessert. It was fun you could hold in one hand. And admit it, you still remember the sound of peeling that lid and the thrill of that first cold push. Up next, a pie that came in a cup, a cake that jiggled on purpose, and a dessert shaped like a pizza, but definitely didn't belong near cheese. Ice cream cups with wooden spoons. Before fancy scoops and artisan gelato, there were ice cream cups with wooden paddles. Small paper tubs of vanilla, chocolate, or swirl served at school cafeterias, birthday parties, and ball games. You peeled off the foil lid, stuck in the flat wooden spoon, and dug in. The wood always gave a faint earthy taste to the first bite, and if you licked too fast, your tongue stuck to it like Velcro. But it didn't matter. This was pure 80s joy. The ice cream was dense and slightly icy, but it was yours, and it felt like a treat earned. The cups were also a ritual, trading flavors, poking at the sides to get that last frozen bite, and racing to finish before it melted into soup. These little cups weren't flashy, but they were perfect in their simplicity. Today's kids have squeezable tubes and pint-sized scoops, but ask any 80s kid, ice cream in a cup with a wooden spoon just hit different. Popcorn ice cream cones. In a time when snacks got weird in the best ways, popcorn ice cream cones were a short-lived but beloved mashup. Picture this, a waffle cone, but instead of ice cream, it was filled with buttery, sticky popcorn, sometimes caramel-coated, sometimes marshmallow glued together like a Rice Krispies treat. The top might be dipped in chocolate or studded with peanuts, giving it crunch and flair. Found at local carnivals, ball games, or small-town candy shops, these cones were part novelty, part dessert innovation. You couldn't lick them. You picked at them, bite by bite, as popcorn chunks fell to your lap. But they felt festive, handheld, and perfect for movie nights or birthday parties. They faded away as popcorn treats became boxed and cones returned to their creamy roots. But the popcorn cone? It was a charming reminder that dessert didn't have to follow rules. Sometimes it just had to make you smile, and maybe leave a few kernels behind. Fizzy Jell-O Pop Rock Style Gelatin Dessert. Yes, this existed, Jell-O that fizzed. In the 80s, kids could make or buy gelatin cups that had a slight carbonated sizzle, often from candies like Pop Rocks sprinkled in before the mix set. The result? A jiggly fruit-flavored dessert that tickled your tongue. The sensation was weird, but awesome. Sometimes it was DIY. Moms would mix Pop Rocks into grape or cherry Jell-O for birthday parties, creating a semi-exploding snack that was both science experiment and sugar bomb. The texture was familiar, but every bite had a crackling surprise. You didn't just eat it, you listened to it. Over time, concerns about choking hazards and candy fads fading out meant the fizz went quiet. But Fizzy Jell-O captured everything great about 80s desserts. They were fun, weird, and unapologetically extra. If you had one at a party, you instantly became the coolest kid there, at least until someone spilled one on the carpet.
Jell-O pudding pops.
Few 80s desserts are as mourned as Jell-O pudding pops. Creamy, smooth, and cold. Not quite ice cream, not quite frozen yogurt. They had their own unique texture. Flavors like chocolate, vanilla, and swirl came on wooden sticks, and the moment you peeled back the frosty wrapper, you knew you were in for something special. The outside developed a slight freezer crust, while the inside remained velvety and cool, like pudding that had magically hardened just enough. Ads promised the taste you grew up on.
And for once, the hype was real. Pudding pops were everywhere. School lunches, TV commercials, convenience stores. Then, like that, they were gone. Changes in ownership, manufacturing shifts, and market trends made them vanish. Today, DIY versions and off-brand replicas exist, but they're never quite the same. Because pudding pops weren't just delicious, they were an era, a flavor, a texture, and a summer memory you could hold by a stick.
Red Flav-or-ice, the most powerful flavor. Yes, Flav-or-ice already made our list. But red Flav-or-ice? It deserves its own spotlight. This wasn't just another color in the box. It was the alpha flavor. It stained your tongue the deepest. It had the strongest punch. And kids fought over it like it was currency. Was it cherry? Fruit punch? Strawberry? No one cared. It was red, and that was enough. When you saw the box in your friend's freezer and spotted the red tubes already missing, you knew you were late to the party. The flavor hit like candy syrup and melted faster than the others, leaving trails of neon down your chin. Some kids even drank the melted juice from the bottom of the tube, pure sugar water and childhood recklessness. Red Flav-or-ice wasn't just a snack, it was a personality trait. You either hoarded them, traded them, or had a sibling war over the last one. And deep down, you still remember that battle. Yoo-hoo pudding pops. Yes, this existed. During a brief and glorious window, the makers of Yoo-hoo chocolate drink released Yoo-hoo pudding pops, frozen chocolate bars with the unmistakable Yoo-hoo flavor. Unlike creamy Jell-O pudding pops, Yoo-hoo's version was icier, with a frosty texture and light cocoa taste that melted fast and hit hard. They were sold in simple cardboard boxes and stood out in the freezer aisle for being both familiar and totally unique. If you were already a Yoo-hoo fan, this was a dream come true. Your favorite drink turned into a dessert. They didn't last long. Competition and limited appeal likely did them in, but their memory stuck. Kids loved the novelty of a chocolate drink on a stick, even if it required fast licking before it vanished into chocolate puddles. Today, Yoo-hoo remains on shelves, but its frozen cousin is long gone. Still, every time someone cracks open a Yoo-hoo bottle, you can almost taste that chilly 80s summer pop again.
Gushers, the original, sticky sweet formula. Fruit Gushers hit big in the late 80s, and while technically fruit snacks, they were basically dessert disguised as health food. The original versions came in vivid neon colors, red, purple, blue, and were shaped like little rubies or gem clusters. The real magic came when you bit into one and it burst with sticky, sugary liquid. Kids either loved or hated that pop, but no one forgot it. Gushers weren't just about flavor, they were about drama. The commercials were chaotic, with kids' heads turning into fruit, and the packaging screamed fun with wild fonts and radical shapes. Over the years, the formula changed. Less liquid, tamer textures. But the OG Gushers? They were messy, sweet, and dangerously addictive. Everyone had a favorite flavor, and opening a pack meant hoping for as few green ones as possible. They weren't lunch. They were a mini sugar grenade with a chewy shell. And yes, everyone tried to squish them before eating. Childhood science. Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Thick-filled 80s edition. Sure, Reese's still exist, but if you had them in the 80s, you know they were a different beast. The peanut butter was grainier, the chocolate was thicker, and the overall size slightly chunkier than today's sleek versions. These weren't polished. They were a little uneven, a little rustic, and totally satisfying. The wrapper crinkled with anticipation. You'd carefully peel the fluted paper from the base and try not to smudge the chocolate. Some kids nibbled around the edges, saving the peanut butter core for last. Others went straight in, no hesitation. They lived in lunchboxes, glove compartments, and convenience store counters. And they were cheap. 2 cups, 1 unforgettable flavor. Over time, the recipe shifted, and seasonal shapes took over. But the original 80s Reese's, that was the gold standard. You tasted both peanut and butter. The ratio was perfect. And if 1 cup melted a little in your pocket, even better. Gold nugget bubble gum in cloth bags. Okay, it wasn't technically dessert, but if you grew up in the 80s, you know that gold nugget bubble gum felt like candy gold.
Sold in tiny cloth drawstring pouches, the nuggets looked like gold rocks, but were actually bright yellow, chewy bubblegum pieces. The packaging made you feel like a miner striking treasure. The taste? Sugary, classic bubblegum. But the real joy was the presentation. Kids carried those pouches around like prized possessions, trading them, collecting them, even refilling them with other candies once the gum was gone. While the gum hardened quickly and didn't hold a bubble long, it didn't matter. The whole experience was the reward. Eventually, concerns about novelty candy and changing safety standards made these harder to find. But Gold Nugget gum wasn't just a snack. It was a prop in countless playground games of pirates, cowboys, and treasure hunters. It made dessert feel like discovery. And honestly, who didn't want to chew like a bandit?
Yogurt cups with crushed candy mix-ins.
Before Greek yogurt ruled the dairy aisle, the 80s had something even better. Yogurt cups with candy mix-ins. Think M&Ms, mini chocolate chips, or rainbow sprinkles in a foil-sealed top compartment you'd peel back and dump into your fruity yogurt below. It felt rebellious. Healthy dairy, corrupted by sugar. The moment of mixing was everything, spoon swirling as colors merged with strawberry or vanilla yogurt, turning it into a confetti swirl of creamy sweetness. Brands like Yo Crunch made these mainstream, but others had local spins. Fruit on the bottom, candy on top. Kids loved it. Moms tolerated it. And it totally felt like dessert in disguise. As nutrition trends shifted, these cups became harder to find or lost their candy edge in favor of granola and superfoods. But back then, yogurt with a chocolate payoff was king. You weren't just eating healthy, you were hacking the system. And every crunchy bite of candy-coated rebellion was worth it.
Candy cigarettes.
Yes, they were wildly inappropriate by today's standards, but candy cigarettes were everywhere in the 80s. Wrapped in red and white boxes that mimicked real cigarette brands, these slim, chalky sugar sticks made kids feel grown-up in the strangest way. Some even had red-tinted tips to resemble burning embers. You didn't eat them immediately. You pretended first, puffing, posing, maybe offering one to your best friend with a wink. The flavor was subtle, mostly just sugary, with a faint vanilla note. But the experience was all about role play. There were even gum versions that smoked with a puff of powdered sugar when you blew through them. Eventually, backlash over marketing candy like tobacco led to their near extinction. And yes, it was probably for the best. But for kids who grew up in that era, they weren't about smoking. They were about imagination. You didn't inhale, you performed. And then you crunched. It was a strange little rite of passage. Sweet, silly, and undeniably 1980s. Marshmallow snowballs, pink, fluffy, and mysterious. Snowballs were strange, let's admit it, but to 80s kids, they were mesmerizing. Twin pink marshmallow domes covered in shredded coconut, hiding a chocolate cake core with creamy filling. The texture combination was wild. Soft marshmallow, chewy coconut, moist cake. They looked like dessert aliens, but that only made them cooler. Some kids hated them, the coconut, the goo. But for others, they were a lunchtime holy grail. Unwrapping one felt like opening a frosted mystery. You never really bit in. You committed to a mouthful of soft, squishy chaos. Over time, their popularity waned, dismissed as old-fashioned or too weird for modern tastes. But those who loved them still remember their smell, the squish of the first bite, and the sweet blend that somehow worked. Snowballs were bold. They were unapologetically weird, and they absolutely belong in the pantheon of strange but unforgettable 80s desserts. Blow Pops. Bubblegum centers done right. That's what Blow Pops were. Bright, bold lollipops with a bubblegum surprise in the middle. They came in flavors like cherry, sour apple, and blue raz. And you always had to decide, lick it to the center or bite right in. The gum inside wasn't huge, but it was just enough to keep the fun going. And the transition, from crunchy to chewy, was oddly satisfying. 80s kids collected blow pops like trading cards. They were currency at school, snacks after baseball games, and bribes during haircuts. The wrappers were crinkly, the sticks bent slightly if you chewed too hard, and the flavor was intense but fleeting. But the joy of getting two candies in one? Over time, other hybrids came and went, but Blow Pops ruled the decade. They were messy, sticky, and totally worth the sugar buzz. And yes, you always tried to blow the biggest bubble with the tiniest piece of gum.
Character-shaped ice cream pops with bubblegum eyes. Ice cream trucks in the 80s had a very specific flex. Cartoon character pops with gumball eyes. Batman, Garfield, Snoopy, Pac-Man, you name it. There was a melty, googly-eyed version on a wooden stick. The flavor was usually vaguely cherry or blue raspberry, and the texture? Somewhere between sherbet and frozen foam. The gum eyes were rock hard at first, then turned into rubbery candy you chewed while the rest dripped down your hand. These treats were a wild mess, and that's what made them great. No two faces looked alike. Most were lopsided or borderline creepy by the time they arrived at your door. But when that jingle came around the corner, and you spotted your favorite character on the menu board, nothing else mattered. Character pops were the stuff of neighborhood legend and sticky summer afternoons. They're still made in some places today, but the originals, they had soul, sugar, and a whole lot of personality.
Jell-O gelatin cakes, swirled in every color.
The 1980s had no shortage of gelatin, but the Jell-O gelatin cake was a next-level dessert innovation. Made by poking holes into white cake and pouring liquid Jell-O over it, the cake soaked up bright, fruity colors that turned each slice into a vibrant surprise. Cherry, lime, berry blue. It looked like tie-dye for your taste buds. Once chilled and topped with whipped cream or Cool Whip, it became a party favorite. Moms everywhere brought it to potlucks, birthdays, and PTA bake sales. Kids loved guessing which flavor swirls they'd get with each forkful. It wasn't overly sweet, and the jiggly texture made it feel like two desserts in one, cake and Jell-O in harmony. While the trend faded by the 90s in favor of more refined confections, those bright cake slabs still live in memory. A gelatin cake was joy on a plate, and nothing said celebration quite like a dessert that bounced when you walked with it. Banana Twins snack cakes. Banana Twins were Little Debbie's underdog treat in the 80s, but to those who knew, absolute gold. Each pack came with 2 soft banana-flavored cake rectangles filled with a ribbon of fluffy vanilla cream. The flavor was unmistakable, not fake banana runt sweetness, but something more nostalgic, like banana bread crossed with birthday cake. Their spongy texture, light banana scent, and satisfying cream ratio made them a lunchbox sleeper hit. Often overshadowed by the flashier zebra cakes or Swiss rolls, Banana Twins still had a devoted following. Kids who loved banana anything, especially those denied banana pudding at home, gravitated toward this pair of yellow perfection. Their packaging was simple. No cartoons, no gimmicks, just 2 golden bars, sitting like shy royalty behind the cellophane window. Over time, they became harder to find, their flavor slowly fading from store shelves. But true 80s snack fans know, when you saw Banana Twins in your lunch, you traded nothing. They were untouchable. TV dinner, brownie squares. If you grew up in the 80s, you know this truth. The best part of any TV dinner was the tiny dessert square in the corner tray. And 9 times out of 10, it was a brownie. The aluminum compartment kept it warm and gooey while your meatloaf and corn reheated beside it. Sometimes it was chocolate cake-like, sometimes it was molten and sticky, and occasionally, if you overcooked it, it became a crunchy chocolate tile. But that was the gamble, the texture lottery, the microwaved mystery of dessert. Brands like Kid Cuisine later took over with colorful sprinkles and blue trays, but the classic Swanson brownies? Pure nostalgia. The smell of microwaved cocoa wafted through the kitchen, blending oddly with Salisbury steak. And when you scooped that first bite, it was often too hot, but always too good to wait. These brownies weren't fancy, but when you were a kid, they were a 5-star finish to a 1-tray feast. Twinkies with the original filling. Twinkies still exist, but the 80s version? Different animal. The original filling had a smoother, slightly buttery vanilla flavor, not as sweet or foamy as modern versions. The cake was softer too,
Light golden sponge with just enough give when you squeeze the wrapper. Unwrapping one felt like a ritual. Peel the clear plastic, admire the oval cake. Take that first glorious bite where the cream squished out just a little. They weren't gourmet, and they didn't try to be. They were consistent, comforting. Every kid recognized that yellow rectangle from across a cafeteria. In lunchboxes or kitchen drawers, Twinkies were a symbol of you got something special. Over time, preservatives, recipe tweaks, and even a factory shutdown changed the formula. But 80s Twinkies had a certain magic ratio: fluffy cake, light cream, no aftertaste. They weren't just a snack, they were a mood. One bite, and you were 8 years old, back on the playground, sunshine on your cheeks.
Chocolate-dipped frozen bananas.
Before they were trendy at fairs and dessert cafes, chocolate-dipped frozen bananas were a fun, quirky freezer treat you could buy pre-packaged or make at home. Sold individually at snack bars and pool concessions, they came coated in hardened milk chocolate, sometimes with crushed nuts or sprinkles, often just plain. The first bite was always a shock. Crisp shell, frozen banana, and just enough sweetness to make it feel decadent. It wasn't quite candy, it wasn't quite fruit. It was somewhere magical in between. Sometimes moms made them at home, stabbing bananas with popsicle sticks, dunking them in melted chocolate, and tossing them in the freezer overnight. Over time, they faded out of lunchboxes and lost shelf space to fancier frozen novelties. But those who remember know that chocolate bananas were the perfect mix of wholesome and indulgent. The best part? You could tell yourself they were healthy, even if you added extra chocolate for good measure. Flav-or-ice freezer pops. These weren't just desserts, they were summertime currency. Flav-or-ice freezer pops came in long plastic tubes filled with brightly colored syrupy liquid you froze yourself. Once solid, you snipped the top off, hopefully with scissors, not teeth, and pushed up the icy treat. Flavors like blue raspberry, orange, and green apple were bold and weirdly addicting. The icy texture was gritty in the best way, and no matter the flavor, they all dyed your tongue like a highlighter. Every kid had a ranking: blue first, red second, green if you had to. The tubes were freezing cold on your fingers, sharp on the edges, and sometimes hard to open, but none of that mattered. On a hot afternoon, there was no joy like tearing through a pack of Flav-or-ice with your friends and watching whose popsicle would last the longest. Simple, cheap, perfect. And honestly, one of the best ways to taste summer. Which frozen treat defined your summers? Flav-or-ice, Otter Pops, or something totally unique to your hometown? Tell us what cooled you off and made memories melt in your mouth.
Fudge striped shortcake.
You probably remember Keebler's fudge stripes as cookies, but in the 80s, they starred in a no-bake shortcake recipe every mom seemed to know. Layer the cookies with whipped topping, maybe some strawberries or banana slices, and let it chill until the cookies softened into a cake-like texture. The fudge stripes added a subtle chocolate ribbon, and the whipped cream soaked everything into a dreamy, spoonable dessert. It was easy, inexpensive, and felt like magic. How did crunchy cookies become cake overnight? This was the era of Cool Whip, canned fruit, and fridge desserts that required no baking and delivered all the sweetness. Some families added instant pudding or swapped the cookies, but the fudge stripe shortcake remained a classic in potlucks and after-dinner rotations. Eventually, more elaborate layered cakes and trifles took over, but those simple cookie stacks with soft fudge centers and cool cream, they tasted like summer nights and just enough effort to feel like you made something special.
The ice cream truck meltdown. Rocket Pops, bubblegum bars, and Choco Tacos.
No dessert list is complete without the chaotic magic of the 80s ice cream truck. Kids ran barefoot down sidewalks, quarters clutched in sweaty hands, chasing down those chimes. The menu? Legendary. Rocket Pops with red, white, blue layers, bubblegum bars shaped like cartoon faces with frozen gumball eyes, and the mighty Choco Taco. Waffle shell, fudge, peanuts, and ice cream perfection. You had mere seconds to choose before the line behind you groaned. Melting started immediately, dripping down arms as you raced to finish before total collapse. The ice cream truck wasn't just about frozen treats. It was about freedom, timing, and neighborhood rituals. By the early 2000s, these trucks began to vanish, replaced by big box brands and freezer aisles. But no store-bought pint compares to the joy of hearing that jingle, sprinting into the street, and handing over your sweaty dollar for a melting masterpiece. It was fleeting, it was sticky, it was everything. Marshmallow snowballs, store-bought pink ones, coated in bright pink shredded coconut and filled with fluffy marshmallow over a chocolatey cake center, marshmallow snowballs were a quirky staple of 80s dessert aisles. Hostess made the most popular version, but other brands had their own riffs. These soft, pillowy domes looked like cartoon food, absurdly bright, mysteriously textured, and definitely artificial. But that was part of the appeal. They came 2 to a pack and often ended up in lunchboxes or gas station snack hauls. Inside the coconut and marshmallow sat a rich chocolate cake, usually with a gooey cream center. Love them or hate them, they were unforgettable. The texture alone was a full sensory event, sticky, spongy, crunchy, and smooth in every bite. Though still made in small batches today, they've mostly disappeared from mainstream shelves, replaced by more polished confections. But back in the 80s, these pink snowballs were a badge of snack-time boldness. You didn't just eat them, you embraced the weird.
Chocolate pudding in foil-top snack packs.
Before everything went plastic, chocolate pudding came in tiny metal cans with foil lids you peeled back with your fingertips, if you were lucky, without cutting yourself. These foil-top pudding packs were everywhere in the 80s. Lunchboxes, snack drawers, and after-school pantries. Brands like Hunt's and Snack Pack ruled the aisle. The pudding inside was thick, smooth, and delightfully cool, sometimes chilled, sometimes room temp, always comforting. You didn't even need a spoon, just your finger if no one was watching. Kids poked, scooped, and slurped their way through these with joy. Eventually, plastic replaced metal, and shelf-stable formulations got weirdly gelatinous. But those original cans, they felt deluxe. A mini dessert in its own tin throne. And for many kids, it was their first taste of independence. Open it yourself, eat it your way. The foil-topped pudding may seem like a small snack, but it packed a lot of memory, and maybe a little bit of metallic mystery too. Ride-on frosted cookies. Yes, you read that right. Cookies you could write on. In the mid-80s, several brands released sugar cookies with a firm white icing surface and included edible ink pens or colorful icing tubes. Kids were encouraged to decorate, doodle, or write messages before eating them, birthday greetings, school notes, or even silly faces. They were sold in novelty gift packs and sometimes even popped up in lunchboxes as surprise treats. The cookie itself was basic, a classic crunchy sugar base. But the real fun was the creative twist. You didn't just eat dessert, you made it personal. Eventually, decorating cookies became a holiday activity rather than an everyday option, and these write-on versions disappeared from shelves. But for 80s kids, they were a perfect blend of craft time and snack time. They didn't just taste like sweetness, they tasted like self-expression, childhood pride, and one bite-sized masterpiece at a time. Which dessert gave you more joy? The ones you could decorate, or the ones that surprised you with hidden fillings? Let us know your favorite interactive treat from the 80s. Lick-a-Stick, the dessert in a tube. Lick-a-Stick, also known as Fun Dip's equally wild cousin, was sugar you squeezed. It came in a toothpaste-like tube, filled with tangy gel in electric colors: blue raspberry, watermelon, sour apple. The taste was pure 80s, neon, bold, and slightly sour with a jelly texture. You twisted the cap, squeezed a dollop onto your finger or tongue, and braced for the flavor bomb. It wasn't elegant, it was pure chaos in a tube. Sometimes it came paired with dipping sticks or other candies, but mostly it was just about squirting flavored goo into your mouth. School lunch tables became arenas of who could handle the most sour gel in one go. And yes, it got messy. Caps were lost, goo leaked into backpacks, and tongues turned wild colors. Eventually, it disappeared from shelves,
likely from a mix of health concerns and sugar fatigue. Lick-a-Stick was equal parts candy, science experiment, and reckless delight.
Magic cookie bars.
These bars had a dozen names: Magic Cookie Bars, 7-Layer Bars, Hello Dolly Bars. But every 80s bake sale had a tray of them. And wow, did they deliver. Made with a graham cracker crust, layers of chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, shredded coconut, and sweetened condensed milk. They were dense, sweet, and dangerously good. Moms loved making them because they were easy. Kids loved them because they were gooey. The texture was chewy with a little crunch, and every bite gave you something different. Sometimes walnuts were added for crunch, or white chocolate swapped in for a twist. But the core memory, that sticky caramel-like finish from the baked condensed milk. You couldn't really eat just one, though you'd try, then end up licking crumbs from your fingers. Today they've fallen out of favor with trendier bars taking their place. But real ones know, Magic Cookie Bars weren't just dessert, they were a lesson in how far one pan of sweetness could go.
Marshmallow treat. Cereal bars.
Forget breakfast. Cereal bars in the 80s were all about marshmallow, sugar, and crunch. Think Rice Krispies treats, but mass-produced, jumbo-sized, and sometimes made from Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles, or Corn Pops. They came wrapped like candy bars and were sold in lunchboxes, gas stations, and corner stores. Kids loved them because they combined two things they adored: cereal and dessert. They weren't pretending to be healthy. They were proudly indulgent, with that sticky, sweet marshmallow coating holding everything together like edible glue. The texture was crispy, chewy, and just the right amount of gooey, and the taste hit all the nostalgic high notes. Some even had a layer of chocolate on the bottom. Eventually, they gave way to granola bars and protein snacks. But these cereal bars were the original fun-size fuel. They didn't try to be nutritious, they just tried to be awesome. And they succeeded. Every bite was a crunchy, colorful celebration of sugar-coated youth. Fruit roll-ups with punch-out shapes. Fruit roll-ups were already iconic in the 80s, but at one point, they got even more fun by letting you punch out little shapes from the snack sheet. Rockets, hearts, dinosaurs, lips, you name it. It was printed onto sticky, translucent fruit leather, begging to be peeled, popped, and played with before getting eaten. Kids would spend more time poking and separating the shapes than actually chewing them. Lunch tables became battlegrounds of "Don't rip it" and "Look what I made." The flavor was tangy and sweet, somewhere between strawberry gum and mystery fruit syrup. But the real appeal was in the interactivity. Over time, the punch-out designs were phased out in favor of rolls and tattoos, but nothing matched the tactile joy of edible stickers. Fruit roll-ups with punch-outs were equal parts snack and art project, and they made even the most boring lunchbox feel like a pop-up party. Push-up pops, especially Flintstones edition. Who remembers the orange creamsicle push-up pops with Fred Flintstone grinning from the wrapper? These were part dessert, part toy, and 100% summer. You didn't lick them. You pushed them from the bottom of a cardboard cylinder until the sherbet bloomed at the top. The texture was frosty yet smooth, with flavors like orange, grape, and cherry. But it was the act of eating that made it special, pressing the plastic stick upward as the treat got shorter and shorter. Half the fun was engineering your bites to avoid collapse. Flintstones push-ups were the most famous, with their colorful tubes and cartoon faces on every wrapper. They tasted vaguely fruity and creamy, like frozen orange soda with a scoop of vanilla. Eventually, newer brands took over with fancier ingredients and plastic molds. But back then, push-up pops were the definition of cool. If your freezer had one, you were golden. And if you had two, you were royalty on the block. Candy dots on paper strips. In the 1980s, you could get dessert in the weirdest form imaginable. Tiny sugar dots stuck to a strip of paper. Candy buttons, or candy dots, were sold in long perforated sheets and came in neon colors: pink, yellow, blue. The flavor? Basically just sugar. But the fun was in the delivery. You tore off a piece of paper and either peeled the dot off with your finger or popped it straight in your mouth, paper and all. Yes, you inevitably ate some paper. No, nobody cared. Dots were a dime store classic, found near the register.
often thrown into birthday party goodie bags. They weren't the most satisfying candy, but they were interactive, nostalgic, and full of charm. By the end of the strip, your tongue was stained, your fingers were sticky, and you felt like a champion. Candy dots weren't just dessert. They were a childhood rite of passage on waxy, edible stationery. Up next, a whipped dessert in a can, a frozen treat shaped like a cartoon face, and the one pudding that came with its own straw. If even one of these forgotten desserts made you smile, share it with us below. Hit like to keep their memory on the menu, and subscribe so they're never lost again.